All right, so hello and welcome to this workshop where we'll be talking about web development using React. So as a quick note, this workshop is going to require a good understanding of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So if you aren't familiar with those, I would really recommend that you go and watch that workshop first. So just as a quick outline, this is what we'll be covering today. We'll be doing a quick introduction, and then we'll be talking about components, props, and state. So let's get started with the introduction. What is React? React is also known as React.js, and it is a free and open source front-end JavaScript library. It is maintained by Meta and an open source developer community. Open source meaning that anyone in the public can actually access and modify it. And it is super widely used in web development. It is actually one of the most sought out after skills in the workforce, so you're in the right place. And some of your favorite websites, such as Facebook, Instagram, and Netflix, were actually made with React. So you may be asking, why React and why is it so popular? So the main reason why React is super useful is because it allows us to have reusable UI components. And obviously this means less repeated code. And on top of that, React allows for really efficient DOM updates, which just means that it is super efficient when making changes to the code because only individual components that have changed will be updated rather than the entire website every single time. All right, so we're going to be learning about JSX. Sorry, so JSX is just an add-on to JavaScript. And what it does is it gives React the feel of HTML with the power of JavaScript. And so it is often used with React to describe what UI should look like. So this line right here, where we set a variable message to what is seemingly a React element, is actually a completely valid statement in JSX. This would display "Welcome to HOTH" on a web page. So let's go in a little bit more into JSX. In JSX, we can insert any JavaScript expression using curly braces. And here's an example. Let's say we have the message that we had from last slide, but we want to insert the year now. So we can have a variable year that is 9 because this is HOTH 9. And we can insert that variable into our React element using curly braces, as we did right here. And this will display "Welcome to HOTH 9. And we can also insert functions. So in this example, we have this function that just returns hack, and we can insert that function into this element, and this would just return, this would display "I love hack." And even more JSX, we can also insert JSX into our attributes that we often use for HTML tags. So if we have this variable URL with this URL right here, we can use curly braces and put that as an attribute. And just to really reinforce your understanding, the example above right here produces the exact same thing as this example below, where we just have our image source as a string literal. And now we're going to be talking about a very fundamental concept in React, which is rendering. I'm just going to give a very simplified explanation where rendering is basically the process by which React takes these JSX components and uses JavaScript to convert them into the bare bones HTML tags. And the HTML tags is how the user is actually able to visibly see these components on the web page. So now I know you're probably wondering how you can set up your own React app. So the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to have to download node.js, which basically will allow for a development server where you can view the outcome of your code in real time. So the link is right here to download, and it's also going to be on the README, which the link is down here if you haven't noticed already. And you're going to want to download the LTS recommended version and the 64-bit version. After that, you're ready to create your React project. So these are some of the commands that you're going to need to run. And don't worry, because we're going to be doing a demo right after this, but the commands are npx create react app, cd into the name of your app, and then npm start. So let's go right into the demo. So the first thing I did here is I just switched to Visual Studio Code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on terminal up here and just open a new terminal. And what this is going to do is it's just going to allow us to execute the commands that we need to in order to set up our React app. So what you want to do next is you want to navigate to where you want to create your React app using the cd command. And that just basically allows you to move to whichever folder you want. So for example, I'm in my home directory right now, but if I wanted to move to a folder called hack and create my React app there, then I would do cd hack. But I'm just going to create my React app here. So this is where I'm going to type out the next command, which is going to be npx create react app. And then next you're going to write the name of your React app that you want. I want the name of my React app to be called Disney watch list. So that is what I'm going to run. So this command actually takes a while to run. So in the interest of time, I'm actually going to pause the recording until this finishes. But as you can see, this is what it looks like when it's running. Okay, so I'm back and my command has finally finished running. So once that's successful, you'll be able to see this says success created Disney watch list and then there's the path to your React app. So it says right here, we suggest that you begin by typing, and it has these two commands, which are exactly the commands that I had on the slide before. So this is what we're going to do. We're going to cd into our React app folder, and we're going to run npm start. And that is basically just going to start up our React app. All right, so as you can see, the npm start, it took a second, but it was successful. And it says compiled successfully. You can now view Disney watchlist in the browser. And it shows you that you can view it locally, which is how you're going to want to view it at this link right here, which is usually going to be localhost 3000. So for me, as you can see, it opened up automatically, but if not, you can just copy and paste that link into whichever web browser you use. And let's take a look at what it is showing. So this is the default code that any React app will start with. And let's try to take a look at how we can edit this. So right now we have our terminal, but we don't see any of the files of our React app. So obviously in Visual Studio Code, what we want to do first is we want to open the folder with all the files of our React app. So I'm just going to go to open and navigate to wherever you created your React app and just find that file that you named as your React app. So I named my React app Disney watchlist. So I find it right here and just click open. All right, perfect. So now that we've opened it, now we can have access to all the files. And what I want you to take a look at right here is the index.js file. So we talked about rendering earlier, and as you can notice here, the rendering actually occurs in this index.js file. So it renders, and as you can see, it renders something called app. And this is actually the app component, and we'll learn about components in the next topic. But what it basically is rendering is this app.js file. So let's look at app.js. This is the app.js file, and what it is showing on the web page is everything within this render function. And you may understand this a little better after we talk about components, but just for now, it is rendering an image. It is rendering a paragraph tag which says edit source/app.js and save to reload. And there's also a link that says learn React. Let's look at our local host and see what this looks like. So as expected, there's an image, there's that header with this text, and there's a link at the bottom. So basically everything in this app.js file is being rendered, and let's see what happens if we decide to take something out. So let's take out this image. We don't want this logo here anymore, so we just delete that tag. Let's save it, and let's reload this web page. Oh, let's see what happened. Okay, so it seemed like npm start stopped running. So I'm gonna, oh, we didn't run npm start once we open this. So let's make sure that we run npm start first. Okay, so now that we've actually run npm start again, because we reopened this file and we closed the other terminal, so it stopped running for a little bit. But now that we've rerun it, now let's see what happened after we took out that image in our code right here. So as you can see, the image is gone. So this is just to emphasize to you that everything in this app.js folder is what is being rendered on the web page. So if you want to have a header that says, hello. Oh, sorry. Let's have a header that says, hello. I am participating in HOTH this year. If we just add that header in, then that's what we're going to see on this web page. So yeah, that is just a short demo on how to set up your React app, and we're going to move into the next topic. Our next topic is going to be components. So what is a component? A component is the main way that we're going to actually be able to reuse code. It is a basic building block of React, and what it does is that it accepts inputs as props, which will be our next topic, and it returns a React element. So I think the best way to understand components is to look at an example. So let's look at these two Facebook posts, and we can kind of see the motivation behind components. Looking at these posts, we can break them down into parts that both of these posts have. So we can see that both of these posts have a kind of section where there's account information. And then they both have a caption, an image, a section where you can display the reactions, and a section with the actions that the user can make. So all Facebook posts have these same components, so it would be super inefficient to rewrite the HTML code for the millions of Facebook posts on the website. And so that is kind of the motivation behind components, is to avoid rewriting that code. But let's break it down even further. Let's look at the account information component that we saw in the previous slide. So we have these two components that we already broke down, and let's see how we can actually implement the component. So looking at these two examples, we see that they both have a profile picture, which we can easily use an image tag for. And then they both have an account information, account name, and we can use like a header tag for that. And they both have a timestamp, which we could use maybe a paragraph tag for. So what are we actually doing in the component? We're actually grouping repeated HTML elements into a component so that we can reuse the component with these HTML elements that appear in every single component that we're going to use these in. So functional components is how we're actually going to write these components. It's actually basically a JavaScript function that is really a component. So here as an example, if we wanted to create a component with an image, a movie title, and a movie description. So here we have the function and it returns a parent div with all three of these inside. And if we were to actually render this component, it would look a little something like this. So as you can see, we have the image, we have the movie title, and we have the movie description. And now we're going to be talking about importing and exporting. So to stay organized when creating a React project, it is really common to have each main component in a separate file. And if we want to use these components that we have in other files, we have to make sure that we export our component at the bottom of the file that we created the component in. For example, if we created our movie component that we had on the previous slide in a file called movie.js, at the bottom of that file, we would have to make sure to write this line where we export default movie. And then we would have to make sure to import it from the file that you want to use it in. So if we want to use that movie component in app.js, where everything will be rendered, we would have to write this line in our app.js file at the beginning. We would import movie component from movie.js. All right, so now we're going to kind of begin our demo, and here is just a picture of the Disney Plus watch list right now. Let's say I wanted to rewatch all the Marvel movies, and I've added some of them here to our watch list. Wonderful, right? But I definitely didn't like all of the Marvel movies, and I don't want to rewatch the ones that aren't worth my time, right? So I could just click into each and every single movie here and read the description to remember what they were about and remember if I like the movie or not. But that's also a waste of my time. Instead, I am going to recreate this watch list and add the title of the movie and add a short description and later a checkbox so I can check off which ones I've watched, because this is definitely not a waste of my time, right? So that's what I'm going to be doing in the demo today. Looking at this image, the first thing that jumps out to me is that I can create a movie component because it seems that each movie has the same parts. We have Captain America, the First Avenger here, we have Captain Marvel, and we have Iron Man and Iron Man 2, but each of them have this like an image, a title, and a description. So let's break that down here. So as I said earlier, let's look at how we can break down a movie component so we can recreate this in our demo. So each of them have an image and we can use an image tag. Each of them have the title of their name and we can just use like a header tag. And each of them have a description and we can use just a paragraph tag for that. And so let's get into our demo. And this part is going to be on components, and we're trying to create that movie component that we just saw. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to basically get rid of most of this code in app.js, because as we saw earlier, this is what app.js is rendering. And this is kind of just the default code, and we're creating something completely different. So we're just going to want to get rid of most of that. So I'm going to get rid of almost everything just except for this parent div with the class name app. And I'm also going to get rid of this logo that we're not using. And just to make sure that that was all deleted successfully, let's make sure that worked. And I see a blank screen, which is what I want because I am not having anything in this app.js right now. And so the first thing that we're going to want to do here is we want to add just the headers that we saw on our Disney Plus watch list that we're recreating. It just has a header that says watch list. And then it also has a smaller header that says my movies and series. And this is just exactly what's on Disney Plus. And these are just basic HTML tags right now. And let's make sure that that shows up, and it does. But this is also kind of ugly and plain, and this is not what Disney Plus looks like. So I'm actually going to add some CSS to make it look a little bit more like Disney Plus. And because I'm assuming that you've already learned CSS before, I actually have some pre-written CSS code that I'm going to be adding in throughout this demo, just in the interest of time. The CSS should be familiar to you, and it'll also all be available on the GitHub repo if you want to take a look. So I'm going to go ahead and add in that CSS that I have and put it into our app.css. And then I also have going to contain these headers in a div with the ID header, because that is what my CSS has. And let's see what that looks like now. Okay, so cool. So that looks a lot more like Disney Plus. We got the background color, we got the font. And so now we can go ahead and actually create our movie component. So as I said earlier, it's very important to stay organized and make sure that each component is kind of in a separate folder. And so I'm going to first create a folder in source called components, where I'm going to be keeping all my components in. And the first component that I'm going to have is called movie, and it's going to be a .js file. And what are we going to want to do in here? We're going to be creating that functional component that we talked about earlier. So it's just going to start with function, and movie is the name of our components. And we're going to want to return something inside. And what are we going to want to return? As we said earlier, we're going to have a parent div first, and then inside that we're going to have an image. We're going to have a header for the title, and we're going to have a paragraph with a description. So we're creating that Avengers movie component first. So we're going to have the title be Avengers, and the image source I have over here. Obviously, I don't have this memorized, but I'm just going to copy and paste that in. And I'm also going to paste the description. All right, so we have the, now that we have our movie component done, remember that we always want to export our component at the bottom of our components file in order to use it in other files. And in this case, we're definitely going to want to use it in app.js, because remember, app.js is the file that the component that's going to be rendered. So if we don't have the movie component in there, it's not going to show up on our web page. So we're going to export default movie, and then we're going to want to put that in somewhere into our app.js. But remember, we first want to import it. So we're going to say import movie from, and then the path to the components, the path to the movie component that we just made, which in this case is this. And so now we can use the movie component in this folder, in this file. And I am going to put this under our header. I'm going to put it in another ID div with the ID movie grid. This is for my CSS, but inside this, I'm going to have 8 movies. And we're going to see how this component shows up. So this movie grid has CSS already, so it's going to be putting it in a grid with 4 per row, but the movie component itself doesn't have CSS yet. So we're going to see what this turns out to look like. All right. Okay, so as you can see here, we have this image. This component is huge. We have this image, we have the title here, and we have the description. And well, we do have 4 in a row, but it's going way off screen, and that's because we don't have CSS for a movie component yet. So again, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy that CSS in from my pre-written code. So I'm gonna want to create a new file here, movie.css. I'm going to copy this part in, and I'm going to give this image an ID so that it will be formatted properly. And let's also remember to import the CSS file here. So import movie.css. All right, so hopefully that formats our image properly, and it does. So our image is now the right size, and we can see that we have each movie component, and we have 8 of them as we specified in app.js. And each component has an image, it has the movie title, and it has a movie description. And so yeah, that is going to be the end of our demo for the components part. Let's move on to our next topic, which is props. So what is a prop? As you just saw in our demo, we successfully created a movie component, but obviously, as good as Avengers is, we don't want our watch list to have Avengers over and over again. And we also don't want to have to create a new movie component for each unique movie. So how do we make our component more flexible in order to display different data? We can use props for this. And so props actually stands for properties, and we can add props to our components to display different information. Similar to how arguments are passed into a function, props is also passed as an argument as a JavaScript object into our functional component. So since our component is basically a function, it kind of is passed in the same way as you would pass in an argument into a function. So this is an example of what a props object could look like. It can have as many properties as we want, and we can define the values by passing them in. So in this example, we have an image property, a title property, and a description property. And these values will be defined in a way that I'll be showing next. So using props, we can pass information into components as self-defined attributes. So for example, in app.js, where we are actually going to be calling this movie component, we can define our attributes. These are basically, we're defining them as attributes, just as an attribute for image can be source equals. These are not, and then because we're defining these attributes, these are going to be passed in as props. And for example, with this statement where we create this first movie component, this is what the props object would look like. It would have a property called title, and the value would be Iron Man. It would have a property called description, and that value would be blah. And now that we have passed in our properties and have our props object, how do we actually use those properties inside of our component? So we can use props inside of our component by accessing the property of props that corresponds to our self-defined attribute using a dot, just like this. So in movie.js, which is our component, make sure that we have the props as an argument. And then inside the code, wherever we want to use those props, we access the property of props that we want to use. So remember that our props object object had a title property, if we wanted the header to display that title, we would just put in curly brackets props.title. And same with props.description, and you can access any of the properties of props just like that. And so now we're going to go into the demo for props. We're going to be demoing how to use props here. So if you remember, last time we ended our demo, we had our movie component, but they were all showing the exact same thing. We have 8 Avenger movies, and we don't want to see that. So we're going to be using our new knowledge of props to see if we can fix that and make sure that each component can show something different. So let's start by adding props to our movie component. And then what we're going to do here is, instead of having a string literal for the source, we're going to use our props object, and we're going to use the property and we're going to have as the image. And then for the name, we're going to use a property that we have for the title, and for the description, we're going to have a property for the description. So that's using it within the component, but how do we actually use props outside of the component and pass them in? So if you remember, we would do it here where we're actually using the component, and what we could do is we could manually pass in the image source, the title, and the description manually, and writing it for each and every one. So for example, we could do image equals, and then we could just, give a random source, and then we could do title equals Iron Man this time, and we can do description equals blah, blah, blah. But this is really inefficient because we're going to have to write this a lot of times. We're going to have to write it for every single one, and we don't know how many movies we're going to have. So writing it every time we want to create a new movie component is kind of annoying. So what we're going to do instead of writing it like this is we're going to create an array of all the movies containing all the movies data, and we're going to use the JavaScript array.map function. So let's first add in the array of movies, and this is also a lot of information, and I have it written out. So I'm just going to copy and paste this array in the top of our app.js file. And let's just kind of take a look at this movie array and see what it has. So it's an array of objects here, and each one has an image, and it has the image source, and then it has a title, it has the title of the movie, and it has a description of the movie. And so for this, every time we wanted to add a movie, we could just add a new movie here like this. And you will kind of see how that's a little bit more beneficial later when we use the array.map function. So let's talk about this array.map function. What the function does, it essentially creates a new array with the results of calling a specific function on every element in the array that it is called on. So that is a little bit confusing. So I'm just going to show an example. I'm going to open up the console, and let's just define an array as this array 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, and then we're going to use the map function. So we're going to call it on the array that we just created. And what it passes in is a function that we want to call on every single element of this array that we have. So we can say for each element X, we're going to return X times 2. And so that is going to output a new array where every element is the element in this original array times 2. So we see 1 and 2, 2 and 4, 3 and 6, 4 and 8, and 5 and 10. So that's just a kind of a basic explanation about array.map. And so now we're going to actually use this map function to create our movie components. So instead of repeating this as many times as we need, we're going to use the map function here. So we're going to take our array movies, and we're going to use the map function, and we're going to take the movie, and we're also going to grab the index just so that we can use it as a key. We're going to use it as the key property for each movie component. We're not actually going to use this property within the component, but we just need a key when using the map function because React needs to be able to uniquely identify each movie component in the array. And if not, it will always throw an error. So we're just going to create that key property. So we're going to take each movie and the index, and we're going to return a new movie component. And for the props, remember, we're going to have to pass them in. So as I said earlier, we're going to just pass in this key as the index. We're not going to use that later, so don't worry about it too much. But what we do need to know is we're going to pass in the image as the movie.image. And then we're going to pass in the title as movie.title. And we're going to pass in the description as movie.description. So that means for every movie in this array, we're going to return a new movie component, and we're passing in this as the value for the image property. And as we can see, the image is the source of the image. As I said earlier, the title is the title and the description is the description. So because we're using this map function, we can just add new movies to this array and not have to continuously add new movie components into this app function. So that makes it a little bit more simple for us. All right, so now that we have this map function and we have our movie array, this should successfully have our new components with different movies and different descriptions and different images. So let's take a look at that. It worked, and now we can see we have a bunch of different movies. We have Captain America, we have Iron Man, and now I'm able to see different movies instead of watching Avengers 8 times. All right, so that's the end of our demo for this props part, and we're going to be learning about state next. Our final topic today is going to be state. So what is state? State allows us to keep track of properties of components on the screen that may change, usually after a user interaction, such as clicking. So an example would be a Facebook like count. So on a Facebook post, every time the user clicks the like button, we want the number of likes to go up. And also with the stopwatch is an example where user interaction is not necessary, but we still want the property will change. So for example, every second we want that stopwatch to move up a second. And so the component is re-rendered when state is updated. So you may be asking, why not just use a regular JavaScript variable for this? It seems easy enough. We can just say, like, when the user clicks a button, we can just increment the like count. While that will change the variable value will increment, a regular JavaScript variable doesn't trigger a re-render in React. So the change won't be displayed immediately because the web page won't be re-rendered. All right, so how do we use state? we have to use this function called useState. So the first thing that we have to do is import that function with this line of code at the top of the file that you're going to be using state in. It just says import React useState from React. And what useState does is it takes in an initial state and it returns a 2-element array. So it is very common to deconstruct the return value of useState just as so here, and so that we can use the return values elsewhere in our code. So you may be asking, what is the 2-element array that it returns? So the first element of the 2-element array that useState returns will be containing the state data. So for example, in this case, for useState, we passed in an initial state of false. So that is letting useState know that our state is going to be a Boolean. It's going to be true or false. And so watched will be the initial value of our state, which is false. And then when the state is changed, watch will keep track of that state. And the second element that the 2-element array has is a function that allows us to update state. So set watched, we can use this function elsewhere in our code to update the state. And you just pass in the updated state as a parameter. So using state in our demo, let's create an image that uses a watched state to show whether or not we have watched the specific movie. If clicked, we're going to want to invert the watch state and change the image shown. So for example, let's say for this Iron Man movie, we have this checkbox here. When watched is false, we want the checkbox to look like this. But once the user clicks that image, we want to invert the watch state, so watch will be true, and change the image to show this checkbox, which shows that we have already watched this movie. So as you may remember, our movie component previously looked like this. We had 3 parts, an image, a title, and a description. But now we want to update it so that we also have that image of this checkbox right here that changes based on our watch state. I want it to be on the right of our movie title just for looks, so I'm going to use a div that will be a grid to contain them in our code. But as you can see, we can use just an image tag for this part of our movie component. And so let's hop right into our demo for state. All right, so this is the last part of our demo where we're going to be completing our Disney watch list, and we're going to be using state to kind of make that checkbox thing to check whether or not we have watched the movie or not. And so the first thing I'm going to do is, because that checkbox is an image, as we noted earlier, I have these 2 images that I'm just going to add to my my file here. And I'm going to create a new folder called images just to stay organized. And I have them downloaded. I'm just going to add them in here. And as you can see here, they are just checkboxes. One is not watched, and then when it's watched, it'll be filled in white. So let's go back to our movie.js. And what we want to do is we want to make sure that we can use those images in this file. So we're going to import them. So I'm going to import not watched image from the file path to that PNG that we have. So it's just going to be images not watched.png. And then I'm also going to import the other image, which is, I'm going to call it watched image. Okay, and so now we can use those images in this folder with these names, not watched image and watched image. So let's go ahead and add that image in. We wanted it after the title, so we're going to add image, and let's just put the source as the not watched image for now. Yep. And let's see what that will look like. Okay, so again, we have no CSS here. We haven't even tried to put it to the right of our title. So this is what it looks like so far, but at least it's showing up. So I'm gonna go ahead and once again, add in the pre-written CSS that we have. So let's add this in. And let's add in some divs here containing the title and the new image we have in a div called grid. And the CSS makes it a grid so that they can be shown side by side. And then I'm also going to give the image an ID so that we can make it the proper size. All right, so let's see what that looks like now. Okay, nice. So we added the images and we have these checkboxes here. Currently, we haven't even started using state yet. So clicking on them, not going to do anything. I'm clicking on them right now and nothing's changing because we haven't even started to use state. So how do we use state for this? Again, we're going to start by importing the function. So up here, I'm going to write import React use state from React. And that will import the use state function. And remember that we want to kind of deconstruct the return value of that use state. So we're going to do that here. And we want our, we want this to be called watch, and this contains our prop data, or state data, sorry. And our state data in this case is just going to be a Boolean true false for whether watched is true or false. And then we're going to have our function that allows us to change our state to be called setWatched. And that is equal to our use state return value. And remember, it takes in the initial value. And I feel like we should make the initial value false because initially we want to assume that our movies haven't been watched yet on our watch list. Oh, not that. All right, so once we have that, let's first write a function that is actually going to change our state. So I'm going to write this function change watched state. And what it's going to do is once that function is called, I'm going to call the setWatched function, which is going to change the state to whatever I put within these parentheses. And what I want it to change to is I basically want watch to invert every time that image is clicked, right? So if it is true, I want it to become false. If it's false, I want it to become true. And therefore, I'm going to set it to the opposite of watched. Okay, and so where do we call this function? As I said, we want to call this function and we want the state to change whenever the image is clicked. And luckily, we can do that by using this onClick attribute for the image, which is built into almost every HTML element. So that is super useful here. So it's an onClick, and what it takes in is it expects a function and not a function call. So the function name is what we're going to be putting in here, which is change watch state. Okay. And while we wrote this function over here separately, this is actually, we don't actually have to write the function. If we wanted to make it more efficient, we could also just put an anonymous function within this onClick where we just do set watched, and we basically just put that, and that is exactly equivalent to writing this function out up here. But since we wrote that function out, I'm just going to use it. Okay, so right now, what should happen when we click the image is that the state should change. The image shouldn't change yet because we haven't written anything that would make it do that, but we can check whether the state has changed by perhaps console.logging the state every time this function is called. So let's do that, and we can see if our state is actually changing. So let's open the console. And let's see when I click this button, what happens. Okay, so as you can see, every time I click this button, the state is changing and it is going from false to true, exactly as we expected it. So now we know that our state is changing, so perfect. The last thing that we have to do here is we want our image to change whenever we click it. So how can we do that? We're going to be using something called a ternary or conditional operator. And I'm going to show an example in the console. The syntax might look a little weird if you aren't used to it, but what it basically does is it takes in a condition. So let's say the condition is 3 is equal to 2, right? And then after that, there's a question mark, and then you have an expression to execute if that condition is true, and then a colon, and then an expression to execute if that condition is false. So we expect this condition to be false. 3 is not equal to 2. And so this second part after the colon will be executed. And as we see, that is exactly what happened. It prints by instead of hi. And then let's try it and see what happens if this condition is true. So 2 is equal to 2. That's true. And then again, hi or bye. And as expected, it prints hi because this condition is true. So it will execute this first expression before the colon. So we can use this instead of an if else statement. It's a little bit more efficient and less code. So let's do that to change our image. So instead of our source always being the not watched image, let's use the condition. What is the condition in this case? We want it to change based on whether watched is true or not, correct? So we're going to have the condition just be watched. And then we're going to have the question mark, and then we're going to have the expression to execute if true. And if true, if watched is true, then obviously we want it to show the watched image. And then the expression to execute is false is the not watched image. All right, so let's see how that works out. Okay, so let's refresh and let's click it. So now it works. Every time we click it, the state changes and the React app also re-renders. And so we can see that the image will change and it will show the washed image instead of the not washed image. And then when you click it again, it will show the not washed image. And as you can see, they all work. So yeah, that is the end of our demo. We have this beautiful new Disney Plus watch list, and we have these new features where we can see if we watched it, and we can see a description and a title. And now I'm happy, and now I can actually start rewatching my Marvel movies. So now that we've learned about the topics that we were going to cover today, and now that we finished our demo, let's just do a very quick recap. So first, we did an intro to React and JSX. So React is just a very popular tool for web development, and JSX is a JavaScript add-on that we use with React. Then we learned about components, which are the basic building blocks of React, and they help us reuse code. Next, we learned about props, which allow us to use the same component to display different information. And lastly, we learned about state, which is data that is stored and updated by a component, and it triggers a re-render in React. And that's it. Thank you so much for watching, and good luck on all of your projects.